Hello, my name is Tony. This channel doesn't have many reviews of comedies. Some might imagine it's because I'm a humorless bastard, or there isn't much that makes me laugh. I think I have a sense of humour, of sorts, and there are lots of things that make me laugh, just not necessarily the majority of comedy films. Humour is such a subjective and complex thing, very person-specific, and most of what I find funny, others find offensive and horrifying, which I don't particularly care about. That's their fucking problem. I mostly like edgy, provocative, challenging, dark humour that others find offensive and horrifying and want to ban, because they don't grasp the concept of freedom of speech, the right to choose, self-determination, and pressing the off switch when it's something you don't like, instead of gluing your ass to a pylon and bawling for instant cancellation. So fuck them. When I was a kid though, I loved Woody Allen movies. Allen was the sort of guy I could relate to. He was a nerdy, geeky, hapless, physically compromised loser, a natural coward without good looks, charm, or functioning social skills. Riddled with global anxiety about sex, death, self-image, and life in general, his characters were thinly disguised or exaggerated versions of himself. Hamstrung by fear, guilt, feelings of inadequacy, all superimposed on a nervy, neurotic personality. All of that I could relate to. His one major saving grace, he was funny. My one major saving grace? I got a book of his essays and early stand-up routines, which made me laugh until I ached. I watched his movies, Take the Money and Run, Bananas, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, Sleeper, and Love and Death, and thought them works of comic genius. The explosive integration of whip-smart, gag-filled dialogue, arch slapstick, pathos, absurdity, satire, and social commentary spiked my synapses and stimulated my funny bone. I really liked Woody Allen, and my favourite Woody Allen film, for reasons I'll go into shortly, don't mind if I call you shortly, do you, is Play It Again Sam from 1972. Who says I haven't got a sense of humour? An interviewer once asked Allen if he could have one wish, what would it be? Without hesitation, he answered, I'd be someone else. I don't believe he was being glib or flippant. I think he really meant it, because I think that's a common human desire most of us experience but don't vocalise. I know exactly what he means and where he's coming from. The last Woody Allen film I truly enjoyed was Love and Death, a fizzing and manic historical romp set during the Napoleonic Wars that sent up Russian literature and director Ingmar Bergman, who he idolised in hysterical style. Love and Death was great, but ironically marked the end of my love of his screen work and the death of the old Woody Allen. See what I did there? It all ended with his next film, Annie Hall. Annie Hall was a critical and financial mainstream hit, and although Allen denies it, I suspect it was cleverly calculated to be that way. A contemporary romantic comedy, proto-chick flick, semi-autobiographical fantasy, Allen still played the same variation of himself, but with more restraint and way less clowning and physical comedy. I guess he was aiming for a more cerebral, less frantic, more mature type of humour that would have a broader appeal and maybe even resonate more compatibly with female audiences. In fairness, that's exactly what he achieved. It wasn't that I hated Annie Hall, it was just the stuff I loved about his other films was toned right down or tuned right out, refashioned into a new age souffle that didn't taste quite as sweet to me. It was as if Allen wanted to grow up and cast away his childhood toys, so out went the cringe-inducing slapstick antics, the manic mugging and miming, the frantic hyperventilating anxiety, rapacious quips, daring casual sexism, and poor taste jokes. All the stuff that made it for me. He was pursuing artiness. In some ways, Play It Again Sam was a forerunner, an indicator of where we would go in the future, which might strike as odd considering I rate it. I'll explain in due course. But first, what's the deal with the film? Allen plays Alan Felix, a socially inadequate schmuck. His primary interests are old movies and jazz records, and he makes a living writing film reviews and essays for a magazine. We first meet him at a screening of Casablanca, where he sits transfixed and emotionally captivated by the classic closing scenes. On leaving the theatre, we hear his thoughts, a narrated internal monologue, a trope which recurs throughout the film, wherein he advises himself that he will never be anything like his hero Humphrey Bogart. Bogart. Alan's wife Nancy, Susan Ann Spatch, a pneumatic and lively but self-obsessed blonde airhead, has left him and filed for divorce. We see her in flashbacks telling Alan how she is sexually and emotionally unfulfilled in their marriage and wants to be free of him to have some fun and find herself. You know, usual pretentious psychobabbling bullcrap. Nancy doesn't spare Alan's feelings in the least, as she details his shortcomings as the root cause of the breakdown of their marriage. His best friends, married couple Dick, Tony Roberts and Linda Diane Keaton, rally round and try to help him find a suitable female to date. Predictably enough, his encounters with the opposite sex are uniformly catastrophic. Dick works in real estate and neglects Linda. A running joke is that wherever he is, he rings the office to leave phone numbers where he can be reached at specific times. He is consumed by work. Linda, a pill-popping neurotic obsessed with psychotherapy, has more of an affinity with Alan, who is equally as dependent on pharmaceuticals and psychoanalysis, none of which seems to help either of them feel any happier. Such chemical and psychological hackery seldom does. Alan begins to believe he is in love with Linda, and with Dick away on a business trip to Cleveland, he confesses this and the two end up sleeping together. Dick returns early and seeks out Alan to confide in him his fear that Linda is having an affair. He professes his love for her and vows to change and do anything he can to win her back. Suddenly Alan is racked with guilt. Well, more guilt than usual. The scene is set for a reenactment of the closing minutes of Casablanca in a fog-shrouded airport, with Dick about to fly back to Cleveland, Linda heading there to see him off, and Alan in pursuit to do his selfless Bogart bit and convince Linda to go with Dick and save her marriage. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But there are a few clever hooks and barbs that make it something special. Play It Again, Sam is an adaptation of Alan's 1969 stage play of the same name. He was responsible for the screenplay, but it was directed by Herbert Ross. It's a rare thing indeed when Alan didn't direct a movie based on his own material. Ross was an ex-choreographer who mostly made musicals and adult comedies, whatever they're supposed to be. He would later direct a run of movies based on the works of Neil Simon. There it is, adult comedy. I'm uncertain as to exactly why he directed Play It Again, Sam, and Alan didn't. One explanation touted around is that it was a more character-driven piece than his previous cinema outings, so Alan was feeling unsure of his capabilities as a director. He believed Ross would handle it better. As it turns out, Ross didn't have much to do other than set up the scenes and let Alan and a talented cast just run with it. The great hook, though, is Alan's character has an imaginary friend. It's the ghost of Humphrey Bogart, Jerry Lacey, who is on hand to provide him with hard-boiled, hard-bitten, supremely macho and wonderfully deadpan advice on the finer points of handling the courtship of the opposite sex. Nuggets of wisdom such as,
dames are simple. I never met one that didn't understand a slap in the mouth or a slug from a .45.
And,
will you relax? You're as nervous as Elizabeth Scott was before I blew her brains out.
and not exactly helpful guidelines for getting it on with the ladies, but the sharp dialogue and Lacey's uncanny impersonation, which is spot on, are simply brilliant and very funny. Alan plays his by now standard loser weakling, who seems doomed to continued failure in life. Throughout he retains an instinctive capacity for physical comedy by way of crippling anxiety. When a would-be date visits his apartment, Alan trashes the place with his clumsiness, and the more he tries to play it cool, the more damage he causes. Casually gesturing with an album sleeve, for instance, sends the vinyl record flying across the room to shatter against the wall. Whatever he says or does, or however he tries to behave, it all goes horribly wrong. It's a talent of his as a performer to make the process seem organic and unrehearsed. Whether lapsing into near anaphylaxis after a single sip of bourbon, or fighting with a hairdryer, or collapsing some shelves, he makes it look as if it's completely genuine and unforced. The way the romance between him and Keaton is handled makes good use of the flaky chemistry between the two. They have more in common with each other than they do with their respective partners. He makes her laugh and she's cute, depressed and vulnerable. Plus, when he does manage to get this quirky, atypically sexy and naturally pretty woman into bed, it made me think, at my young and tender age, there's hope for me yet. There wasn't, of course, because it's still a fiction, and someone like Woody Allen could never hope to have someone like Diane Keaton as a dance partner in the horizontal rumba stakes in the real world. Could he? The women Alan tries to date are completely unsuitable and way out of his league, and nothing goes to plan. He gets rejected by a self-confessed nymphomaniac and beaten up by bikers. His date takes off with one of his attackers. He's on a hide into nowhere when he describes the sort of females he's attracted to as beautiful blonde-haired Amazonian types with large breasts and butts he could sink his teeth into. The other thing that makes Play It Again Sam so appealing is the love and respect Alan clearly has for classic films such as Casablanca. In many ways, it's a love letter to that movie and its star. When the house lights go up in the movie theatre at the beginning, you see the emotional impact the film has had on Alan's character. Everyone else just gets up and leaves, whilst he is still lost in the moment. Looked genuine to me, a moment of real sincerity. And the inclusion of Bogart as a mentor is a stroke of genius that works perfectly because it's written and handled so well. What can I say? It's my favourite Woody Allen film, even if the title is a famous misquote and wasn't what was said. But maybe that was the point. The legend and legacy of the thing is what's important. I'm not going to get bogged down in the man's private life and the scandal of him shacking up with his stepdaughter and the unproven allegations made against him. If I stop watching films, the making of which involves someone who was either accused or found guilty of something dodgy or illegal or morally off-key, I wouldn't be watching many films at all, if any, and neither would you. So I'll park the static and concentrate on the art. Woody Allen was one of the best American comic actors, writers and directors in the history of the movies. I lost interest after Annie Hall, but prior to that he amused the hell out of me, and at the risk of being accused of going soft and sentimental in my old age, Play It Again Sam remains for me his coolest and most enjoyable movie. Here's looking at you, kid. Thank you for your time and attention. If you feel you can, hit like. Didn't like, post a comment or subscribe. Next up, a distinct change of tone and pace and content. I'd almost talked myself out of doing it, then I talked myself back into it. Either it will be okay or it won't, and if it isn't, time will tell. Quickly. Now I just have to do it. This might take a while.